in a pose, like let's say like Warrior Two, I had nowhere else to be other than be in Warrior Two. So I had to be in that pose. And I think just the practice of, being in that place and really being there, like noticing your breath and, like feeling what I was feeling, like, even feeling like, some stiffness in my back that got me into the present moment.
You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode number 326. Today, we're talking about the power of yoga with former professional football star Sean Conley. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast, now with over 1 million downloads. Here, it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you've calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark Field's Mindful Mama mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of Mindful Parenting, and I'm the author of Raising Good Humans, a mindful guide to breaking the cycle of reactive parenting and raising kind, confident kids. Welcome back to the Mindful Mama podcast. I hope you're doing well, hanging in there wherever you are in the world. Oh my goodness, the things that happen in the world. But, today we're going to focus on the amazing positive stuff that happens in the world. So I had the great pleasure this past year of talking to a really wonderful man who was a professional NFL American football player who found yoga and had it really transform his life. So I'm so excited for you to join me at the table. I'm going to be talking to ex-NFL kicker Sean Conley. He was in the Detroit Lions, the Indianapolis Colts, and the New York Jets. And he suffered these career-ending injuries from overtraining, and he started practicing yoga as part of his rehabilitation. And really, it was the mindfulness, the meditation, the philosophy of life really led him in a new direction. So he's a dad. We talk about parenting. I'm so excited for you to join me for this conversation to really hear his story about how he took yoga and really had it transform his life. And so I'm hoping if you are a fan of football, or if you're a spouse of a fan of football, you might be excited about this idea of Sean's story. He's a really like great down to earth, relatable person, and just talking about how the challenges in our world and how the things that mindfulness and meditation and yoga can bring to them from the perspective of someone who is not into those things at all in the least at first. So before we dive into this episode, I want to remind you that the Mindful Parenting Teacher Training Program from 2022 is our deadline for applications are the end of the year. So if you are interested in grabbing one of the last spots, we only have a couple spots left. The applications close on December 31st, and you can learn more about that at mindfulparentingcourse.com/teach. That's mindfulparentingcourse.com/teach. All right. That's all I got to say. Join me at the table as I talk to Sean Conley. I don't talk to a lot of football players. I have to say, I'm like really fairly indifferent to football, and I'm like a little like worried about football because it's really dangerous and
Mhm.
harmful for the people who are playing football. So I'm find myself surprised to be talking to a football player, but that's pretty cool that you went from being like a football player to a yoga teacher and author, your dad. I want to talk about that. But can you tell us a story? Like, oh, you were like a pro football player, right? And then
Right.
you moved towards yoga.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, especially when I was in the football, the teaching yoga was the last thing I ever imagined I would do at that point. But
Can I ask, what did you think about? Like, did you have any thoughts about like or assumptions about what yoga was when you were like a pro football player in that part of your life?
oh yeah, yeah, I thought it was really weird and out there. So when I played, in the NFL, it was the early '90s. So yoga wasn't mainstream. It was just really way out there in the fringes. It wasn't. in cities like Pittsburgh or Cleveland. It was just, on the coast, probably New York City, LA, that was it. My wife, though, she was a pioneer into yoga, so she was already into it. She'd done some training. And so while I was playing for these NFL teams, she was into it. She was trying to get me into it as well because I was having all kinds of injuries. She also told me it could help my mental game, which is, a huge part of the sport, especially at that level when, it's such a high level of athletic ability for the players in the NFL. But usually the difference is just very small, and it can be mental. But I didn't buy into it because I just figured it just didn't match up with the type of training that I had done my whole life up to that period, which was more aggressive and brute force. And so there wasn't anything at that time that seemed to make any sense where I should bring in something that was more gentle or more balanced. So I resisted it until well after my career. And then my body was in such bad shape that eventually got to a point where I just decided to give it a shot.
And it was like a pretty I mean, so I read the point after, and it was really a pretty big roller coaster, the career. I mean, it sounds like it's incredibly, I mean, as one might imagine, if we think about it, like an incredibly challenging place to be working in.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I- when I made the jump from college football to the NFL, I just, watching it on TV, it wasn't real. But when I was there and I was in these training camps, and it took on a whole nother nature. Like there was a whole like layer that was just kind of peeled from me that, I kind of knew was there, but I didn't realize that was there. And that was just the brutality of the game, how you could be on the team at 8 o'clock in the morning, but by 2 o'clock you're gone. Like there was one day when I came back after practice with the Detroit Lions. There was a guy I was starting to become like friendly with, and his locker was cleared out, and like that was it. I said, "Hey, what happened to so and so?" And they said, "Well, like they cut him." And then I said, "What do you mean they cut him just like that?" He's like, "Yeah, don't you know what the NFL means?" I said, "No." He goes, "Not for long." So, and of course, like 3 weeks later, I got cut. But that was the nature of the business. It was a business, and the players, like you mentioned earlier before we started the conversation was. Like at the violent nature of the game, and I used to assume that all these players just love the game, but when I started to talk to them one on one, like they just wanted to go home to their families and still be in one piece.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't. That's not like what you think about when you're
Mhm,
watching, people in the NFL. You think, oh, like they've got it made. They're psyched. It doesn't
mhm.
matter. Maybe those injuries don't matter so much to them because this is such a big dream for so many people. But then I get, reading your book, it really was interesting for me to see, like, oh yeah, at the end of the day, this is a job, and but then there's this incredible threat of like physical harm and injury. It's really a very unusual job in that way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it was unique for me because I was a place kicker, so I had my injuries that I would had and other kickers. It's repetitive use since we kick
Mm.
over and over and over again. And so by the time you're in the NFL, you've kicked tens of thousands of footballs, and so that's why some kickers you'll see they only last a few years. Some can last longer. Sometimes they don't last long because they miss too much, but their legs can wear down. The other players, it wasn't so much repetitive usage of running or pushing or kicking. It's just getting hit multiple times. And sometimes you'll see stories about like, oh, such and such player is holding out on training camp and he's not showing up, and a lot of the fans will get upset like, oh, he needs to get in there with the other guys. But a lot of players just do that, and it's understood. Like in the locker room, there's never um any like negativity towards that player who's not coming to training camp. There's that Players want that rest. And so, their season starts, it used to be, back in the day, this is going way back, like you'd have other jobs in the off season. This is like back in the 60s, but the 70s, but now these players, they train, it's all year round. And so these guys are getting very little physical and mental breaks.
Mm. Wow. Um, so your wife, she's the one who introduced you to yoga, right? Like, didn't you start from like a Rodney
Absolutely.
Yee video or something like that? I'm
Yeah.
I think I had that Rodney video. I think
Yeah,
my
I think
mom had
everyone's
that or
had that
something.
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, everyone's had that one. Yeah, he was like the OG, one of the OGs, like
Yeah.
for like bringing yoga to the home, the VHS, and yeah, that was it for many years. Yeah, that's how she got me into it, and but it took her years to get me to buy in, and it was really it was a combination of her like just pushing me, but also where my body just was done, where I felt like desperate. So I was very stubborn to go into it, and looking back, and I certainly don't regret how things went for me. But if I would have done it earlier, it probably would have I would have been able to lengthen my career.
Mm.
Um, just because I just learned so much in yoga, not just to take care of my body, but just also just to like, not be, to have a better control, so to speak, or manage like the inner dialogue, as a professional football player, it's like ups and downs. Like you never want to get too high or too low. Cause if you got too high, like you can make a mistake in the next play and then that's it. And then you're down too low, so like, but yoga, can help that, nowadays, almost every NFL team has some sort of yoga program or meditation program that they're working with. And if they don't, they almost seem like they're not not keeping up. And so now it's good
Wow.
that it's starting to work in more mainstream, like even beyond NFL, like LeBron James does yoga now and Kobe Bryant was really into yoga and meditation. And so now it's it's very accepted. So which is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I live 30 minutes outside of Philadelphia, so I remember, like, the Philadelphia Eagles doing yoga and being super psyched about it. So,
That was
eh
actually yeah, I'm sorry. Well, that was the Philadelphia Eagles were the first NFL team to do yoga. So that when I was
Mm,
in 1995, when I was with the New York Jets, I remember, I just got through, like, working out in the gym, and there was 3 players, and they were going through, like, the local newspaper there, the Philadelphia what is it? The Examiner?
Inquirer.
Inquirer, that's it. And they're in sports section, and there was an article about, the Philadelphia Eagles doing yoga, and they were all making fun of the Eagles for doing yoga. And actually, the guy who was teaching them yoga, I wouldn't know this until I got into yoga 5 years later. His name was Baron Baptiste, who was friends with the owners, the Deluries. So they were the first team to do it, and it took the rest of the NFL at least another 5, 6 years to carry on. But that was like the first story that I know of any NFL team that was doing yoga. That was like in the mid 90s.
It's just because 'cause we're so advanced, right, in this general
Exactly.
area.
That's it.
When I first started teaching yoga, one of the very first job I got was at, like, this sort of, like, slightly low-end gym where, it was, like, full of these, like, really beefy, like, bodybuilders, and they were, like, these huge guys, and I would teach this, vinyasa yoga class, and these guys would cut like every week, like at least one of the guys would come in and they would be like huge men. And then we would go into I would be like, go into a warrior two, and we're just holding out the arms. And man, these guys were suffering. Like they had so
Uh-huh.
much trouble
Yep.
holding their arms out. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to hold your arms out in Warrior 2. Anyone who's done that knows it's hard, but for them, it was really, really hard, and they just, like, poured the sweat poured off, and
Mhm.
they were huffing and puffing. It was intense to watch them, so I'm just wondering if,
Yeah.
like, when you started, was that what it was like for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great story. What's so crazy? That's such a universal like yoga for athletes story. And a handful of years ago, my wife and I were working with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that was the first class. I remember we taught to them like there's maybe like 40 guys there, and it was the same thing. Like we would call out a pose and bring them into a warrior one, and they would just be huffing and puffing and overworking, over trying in every pose. But that was like their mentality, their football mentality that they brought in, where you push 110%, and it took them weeks. We started this like in May, and it took like a couple months, for them to start to buy in that you don't have to do everything super super hard and push it. And
Mm.
and to answer your question, yeah, that was the same thing for me. Like the first yoga class I took for my wife, I immediately just everything I learned from football and sports, it was like, okay, I'm going to push, I'm going to press, and I'm going to try to do all the poses because that's how it's supposed to be, right? We're supposed to do everything 100%. And it took me a whole bunch of classes to realize that that was not an effective way to do yoga. And it was class after class where I would be exhausted until eventually I started to realize, because I remember my Karen, my wife, she would just be like, she'd talk to the class about breathing. And that was something I'd never heard of. Like, why would I breathe like in a sport? Like that doesn't make any sense. There's no time to breathe because we need to keep going. So that was like a big awakening for me too. And that's like whenever we work with sports teams, like we work with a University of Pittsburgh football team sometimes, a basketball team, and we bring in the breath work. And that's always because we always know that's going to be the hardest thing for them to take on. And if they don't take on the breath, if they don't to buy into the breath, they're probably not going to do yoga very long because, like you mentioned, they're just going to struggle. And if they just keep struggling, they're like, well, why am I going to do this?
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
that's like like how do you get them to that point though? So that's hard, and so that's up for the individual athlete to to have the discipline to stick with it to get to that point.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. Hey, dear listener, Hunter here. Did you know that kids ages 5 and older can now be protected from COVID-19 through vaccination? It's okay to have questions about the COVID-19 vaccines. Just make sure you get answers from a reliable source, like your child's doctor or nurse. You can visit the CDC website, cdc.gov, for additional information you can trust about how COVID-19 vaccines can protect your entire family. That's cdc.gov, cdc.gov. Well, it's like a complete mental shift, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Uh-huh.
but that's a shift that's, I think, just to bring it back, like, that's a real common attitude. I'm sure it's super common in football. It's got to be essential in football, that like striving
Mhm.
and like 110%, like aggressive, like work harder kind of thing. But like that's really cultural for, at least I feel like I can speak for Americans. People in
Mhm.
the United States, like, is like intense this attitude of striving and trying that we have. And I teach mindfulness, and it's like we come to it there, and there it's like even more fruitless than in yoga because it's
Mhm.
like all there is like sitting.
Mhm.
And yeah, I guess it's like, and in yourself, how did you see that shift from that striving and towards a, and what would you describe what you shifted into?
Yeah, well, when my career ended, like for a lot of athletes, it was not on my own, not my own terms. Like I had this plan, okay, so now I made the NFL after playing at the University of Pittsburgh. I've made the NFL. Now I want to be in the league for 10 or 15 years. I want to make a certain amount of money, and I want to play for this team, and so on and so forth. So I had all these goals. Um, but when that was pulled away from me, so to speak, just after just a handful of years in the league because of injuries, I really struggled with who I was, my identity, because from a very young age I got into kicking when I was 8 years old. So from 8 until age 26, 18 years, like I was a kicker. That's who I always thought was going to be, and that's why who I was for a while. And so when that ended, I really was stuck for a few years with what next? And so when I started doing yoga, it was just physical. That's how my wife got me into it. She's like, hey, just, do it to help your back. But when I started practicing and practicing and practicing, and I wasn't even trying to get anything more out of it than the physical, but when I would start to practice on a more consistent basis, and when I would start to breathe and be more with myself, because I think for a lot of the time period, I was always very external. Like this is how things are supposed to be. My life's supposed to have this beginning, this middle, this end. That when I would practice yoga and I would just be there, for example, in shavasana, I just had to be with my thoughts and be with myself. I think over time that started to penetrate, where I started to see more clearly that, hey, um, it's okay that your career didn't go the way it was, because now there's other opportunities out for me. So that was like the big shift when I started to see more clearly that life's not always going to go the way like you want it to. And I never really stopped to pause and smell the roses, so to speak, and really be in the moment. Because I was always like, "What's next?" Okay, so if I was trying out for an NFL team, I wouldn't be happy till I made the team, and if I happen to make a team or get a certain point into the progress, then I wanted more, and so there was always like that more. But just the practice of yoga, meditation, mindfulness helped me to realize like, hey, just there's something happening right now, and the past is where it is in the past. So
It's a shift that happens. It's an incredible shift, and it's a shift that happens really gradually, like, we don't even realize it a lot of the time because it's happening so gradually. I mean, I teach mindful parenting, and we start with mindfulness, and one of the things that happens is that, the first thing we start with is a meditation practice, and then the thing that's really interesting that happens, I see again and again, is that the person who's in the course, who's the practitioner, most usually she is, it doesn't see those changes in
mhm,
herself so much, but then her partner will say, "Oh wow, like you're different, like
right.
you're way
Mhm,
calmer, like with the kids or whatever." Like these differences, they because they're so imperceptible to ourselves. It's like watching our kids grow up. Like we don't see the changes in
right.
ourselves, but other people see those changes in ourselves. So I guess I imagine it's hard to kind of pinpoint like, oh, I was there and now I'm here. I mean, I guess that's hard to pinpoint for you. I mean, it's kind of hard for me too, of course.
Yeah, yeah, I don't think I had, like, a specific, like, aha moment.
Yeah.
It was just, like, it was time and just, like you said, like, very gradual, which I think is really common for a lot of people, like, even come to our yoga studios, like, sometimes, like, you can tell that just how they may talk to you, like, they're looking for, like, a quick fix for what they're going through, but, like, it just that there's no, like, magic on-off switch, and it's just for everyone, it's just, so different to have these, shifts, so to speak.
And what you were describing was, this idea of like what's next, like the whole future thinking. You're really describing like, and you described like I had this story, I had this idea of what was supposed to be. And like it's like that, that experience of not really being in the experiential body, but like being in the storytelling mind and these stories you were telling yourself. So when did you start to like kind of when did you start to shift into a new story? Like, with that, when did that new chapter begin? I mean, because you own a yoga studio now, like this is like your life. So
Yeah.
how did you come to that decision?
Yeah, the yoga took some time because when my NFL career first ended, I looked for something to fill that void of competition. So I started to like try to like, oh, I'm going to enter an adventure race and I'm going to try to be like a professional adventure race person, and then I'm going to get into sales because I can win awards and sales contests and make a lot of money, and so I seemed to gravitate towards that, and that's what I did for a while. I was in sales for a good 8 or 9 years, and I actually did quite well in the pharmaceutical sales and biotech sales. But while I was in that, I knew the whole time like this wasn't healthy for me. Like this is the same old race that I was in of just trying to accomplish more and to get more. So
I
you know,
imagine you also like you're a dad at this point too, right? Like,
yeah.
you probably have this a real sense of like, I need to be providing for my family too, right? Like that's a
Yep,
big thing.
absolutely. Yep. Yeah, because that's what happened too. Like when I was on a team, then off a team, on a team, and off a team, I was more unemployed than employed. So that was part of it too. So like I had to like bring in a sense of income, but it really wasn't working for me beyond providing for my family was great, but I knew for what I was doing wasn't really speaking to me, and I still had my yoga practice. So I think that's what was starting to really start to bump my head and my heart about what I really wanted to do, because the more I taught, then I started to realize like, wow, this is something that really, I can help people, because I started to, just, speaking to students after class about what they're going through. Then I connected the dots that, what I went through, how yoga helped me move beyond, my failed NFL career, so to speak. And, how my dream blew up, like it helped me move beyond that, helped me to start look at things like with a different perspective, to be more grateful. Like, practices I really, just quite frankly wasn't very good at until really got into yoga. That's when I realized like, hey, maybe this is something I could do full time. And then my wife owned a studio, and then as luck may have it, a teacher moved out of town, and my wife was the only teacher other than the other teacher that was there. She said, "Hey, you got to teach for me," and that's when I said, "Okay." After saying no for about a month, but so it was unusual for me to be a yoga student at the time, but to be a yoga teacher was something I thought no way. But here we
You-
are, 20 years later.
and you work with your wife, and how many kids do you have? You have a few, right?
We have four.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, so I want to talk about that, but first I want to pick up on something you said. You said it's like how your yoga is helping you be more grateful, and I
Yeah.
wonder if you could just like dive into that a little bit because, the from the outside perspective, it's like you're on a mat, you're doing
Mm.
postures, like some of these postures we know were developed by like Russian gymnastics, like
Right.
we know
Right.
that, right? Like it's not
Right.
like there's like some special
Right.
magical sparkles that shoot out
Uh-huh.
of your ears when you're in a triangle pose that like
Yeah.
transform your life, right? Like, so tell me a little bit more about how
Yeah.
yoga made you more
Yeah.
grateful.
Yeah, this is like the $1,000,000 question. Like when people ask, it's like, "Oh, how's yoga make me feel, more content?" You're like, "Oh, how am I gonna explain this?" You almost like have to do it. Yeah, and I think for me, the easiest way to explain it was like, well, so the same year, just within a few months that my football career ended, I found out that my father had terminal cancer, colon cancer. Um, like when he and then after he passed away 4 years later, I entered this dark space of being, still upset about not getting over my football career, but now also with my father passing. But by
Sorry.
going to yoga and just being with myself, and instead of like because if I'm driving down the street in my car, usually my mind would be all over the place, and it would be like, I'd go back to the football, I'd go back to my dad. But when I was in yoga, like in a pose, like let's say like warrior two, I had nowhere else to be other than be in warrior two. So I had to be in that pose. And I think just the practice of, being in that place and really being there, like noticing your breath and, like feeling what I was feeling, like, even feeling like, some stiffness in my back that got me into the present moment. So I think it's that repetitive practice of being more in the present moment to being more in present moment. It just, kind of clears the cobwebs. And now instead of, but maybe when I was driving to yoga, being really sad about my father being gone, and having regret about like maybe not saying this to them or this to him, or spending more time with him. I would start to see it differently, and be more grateful, like how lucky I was to have the time I would with him. And I hope I'm doing a good job explaining this, but it's so hard to put into words. But I think there's just that repetitive practice of practicing being in the present moment, that it just starts to clear things up some. So
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. We are supported by Evite. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that life's better together. And with the holidays here, I'm really looking forward to celebrating with friends and family. So we actually have some plans to have our friends and neighbors over. Everybody's vaccinated, and we want to actually celebrate the holidays again. Oh my goodness. And I really want this year to be extra special. So I'm not going to call or text. I'm going to Evite. Evite offers thousands of free invitation options, all fully customizable for your occasion. Birthdays, weddings, baby showers, holiday parties, whatever you're celebrating, no matter how big or small. You can choose a design created by their community of professional artists or upload your own unique design. Evite's design templates make it easy, fun, and simple to create an invitation so everything you're celebrating feels just a little more extra special. It just takes a few minutes to create and send invitations to everyone on your guest list. Plus, there's RSVP tracking people that makes such a big difference for not that organized people like me. Oh my goodness. Evite also makes it super easy to link a registry or a gift list to your invite too. Best of all, it's free. I've loved making Evites for my girls' birthday parties and holiday parties. It is so easy to use. They have funny designs and they have elegant designs and it just looks good and professional, and you can really get a sense of what the party's about when you get an Evite. Evite is making my celebrations feel extra special and they can help you too. Head over to evite.com/hunter to choose from thousands of design options to create and send invitations for free. That's evite.com/hunter. evite.com/hunter. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is hard to talk about, but yeah, I think is like it opens your awareness, right? Like you're
Mhm.
coming into the body and the senses.
The
And as I
awareness, absolutely. Yeah.
And I thought about as I thought about that, this idea like you're coming into your body in yoga. I'm like, well, but he was a football player, like he was doing something like really physical. But what's different about that, right, is like that whole piece, like you're not trying to cheat, right? There's no competition. The whole point of being in yoga is to feel what you're feeling. Like there's not like,
Right.
you can't just like I mean, you could keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it until you're like a Cirque du Soleil, like contortionist, right? Like, but
Right.
that's not the
Right.
point, right? Like, um,
Yeah, and
it
it was strange because like I suffered from, you could say, when I first started doing yoga of of body issues, because I remember when I first did yoga, I'd look around the room and there's 20 people in the room and everyone's moving through the room and there's a class full of women and it was myself when, because like men weren't doing yoga then. And I really struggled with that. Like I'm like, wow, I was just an NFL football player and I can't do this stuff. And I'd look in the mirror there and I'd see how my body looked. And I really struggled with that. And but that was also something too, the more I practiced, I started to realize that yoga wasn't about how I looked or how much I stretched. It was just, spending some time, that hour and a half of just focusing my breath, and all that other stuff didn't matter. But it took me a while to get to that point too. But that was something that was such a big eye opener for me, that I used to think like it was just this macho thing to be this professional football player, but there was nothing macho about it. If my body was really strong, but my mind wasn't, I really wasn't healthy. And so it was, through the practice of yoga and meditation, mindfulness, that made me realize that. But that took a while. And now, like, there's a lot of poses I can't do. Like some people, like when I meet them randomly and I tell them I do the yoga, like, oh, show me this pose. I'm like, I can't do that. Like I mean, for me, my yoga practice is pretty basic. I can do the down dogs, the high push-ups, the low push-ups, the warrior ones, but that's it. And when I first got into yoga, I tried to like go beyond all that, because that was, especially in around 2000 when I got into yoga, yoga was also about getting a certain point into the practice. It's become uh I guess you could say, we talk about more about accessibility now and adaptability and listen to your body, but that really wasn't first yoga. It was about getting to a certain point. But I fell into that trap too, where I got hurt in yoga till I learned that, like, I realized it wasn't about that at all.
yeah, that your ego can like push you. I got into that competitive thing when I did my teacher training. Like, I'm one of those like freakishly flexible people
Mm,
that, was like, oh, yoga, this is great, right? And but I also have a long back that I inherited from my dad, and he has back problems. And um I dr I went to my month-long yoga teacher training. I, like, drove there, like, 5 hours away in the car. I'm 5 hours in the car, then I get out, and I'm, like, there for a month, okay, and the first thing that's there is an Ashtanga primary one
uh-oh.
series.
Yeah. Yep. I know where you're
He's
going.
already knows. He already knows, but for those who don't know, like, the Ashtanga yoga primary series is, like, forward fold after forward fold after forward fold. It's like all forward folds. And I was like all full of ego and just was like, I'm super flexible. I need to show my teacher how flexible I am. And I
Mhm.
basically pulled the muscles in my lower back and like effed myself up right at day one of being there for a month and doing yoga like multiple times a day. It was a really interesting experiment uh, and learning for me, like an incredible learning for me about what yoga was and what yoga was not. It's like really helped me to
Mhm.
practice safely, I think, too. But yeah, I can imagine that like being a man in that whole situation, and like you can't do these things. And there was this like the language has changed from like let's you see, bring, to the like kind of like extreme instructions
Mhm.
sometimes, right? And if you couldn't do that thing, you were like, wait, I can't do that thing. And so you would be feeling like, I can't do this.
Right,
And so
right.
there is a lot more, I agree, there's a lot more accessibility now, which is good. Um, yeah, I kind of think of it as like, like it's like mindfulness for people who just like are have a lot of like I call it like your yayas, right? Like you have a lot of like energy, you have a lot of like, and that's like what I think of like what anxiety is, right? Anxiety is like an energy in your body. Like you have a lot of energy that you need to move through your body. And
Mhm.
it's this like, yeah, like the movements are not like there's not like some special ancient magic about the particular like doing a back bend is just doing a back bend, or doing a high plank is basically doing a push up, right? But when you're but the idea of pairing mindfulness with movement, it's like a way to practice mindfulness without the like jittery fidgetiness, I guess.
Mhm.
Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think he did a much better job explaining like what the whole yoga because it's yeah, when I was first writing the book, the idea changed a couple times, but it was first I was going to make it more of like a how-to yoga, and I asked um, our studio sent an email and said, "Hey, I'm writing a book. Does anyone want to share their story about how they got into yoga?" And what was struck me as so fascinating about it, I got like all these responses, and I could only take like 20 because that's what I thought I'd weave throughout the book, but everyone's story about their shift in yoga was completely different with them what they helped them overcome, and it was such an eye opener for me that we I guess like you could say like we don't know what the person next to us is going through, and people would come in and out of the studio and everyone would appear happy and healthy, but then when I read the stories I was like, wow, like I can't believe what she went through and what he went through, and they helped it with yoga, and I always wonder like how did they go through that? Was it gradual? But they all had these shifts, but it was through the practice, and I think it's what you said. It's like we have to work through this energy, and when people ask us like, hey, I want to do yoga too, what type of yoga should I do, and I always tell them like, I'd love if they came to our studio because we teach power yoga, which is very physical, and it can be hot, and for some people they need that, that's what helps them move through the energy, but some people, maybe it's something more passive will help them like move the energy, but there has to be something that sparks this moving, and even if it's just sitting, if that's something that they're not comfortable with, like there has to be so I guess what I'm saying is like there has to be something that's uncomfortable for them to get the shift going.
Like we need a challenge, right?
Hmm.
We need a piece of that challenge of like
Hmm.
staying with whatever is there, whether it's
Exactly.
a mental energy or a physical
Hmm.
energy or something like that. Yeah, I think yoga really teaches you how to manage energy, you know.
Hmm.
I did my first like silent retreat in 2019 for 7 days,
Oh wow.
and and I I know, like, I can't just, like, sit and walk slowly all day, like, that's just not gonna that's just not gonna work for me. I have a lot of energy, like, I have a lot of physical energy, and so I would do, like, a vigorous yoga practice, and I
Mhm.
would go for
Mhm.
or I would, like, go for a run every day or something like that because I could see that management of energy piece where I needed to, like, burn energy to be able to sit for a meditation for 45 minutes and then another meditation for 45 minutes and another like silent sitting, like later. Um, yeah. And then also the reverse, right? Like managing energy to cool down. Yeah. I think
Right.
that's one of the greatest like technologies, I guess, that yoga gives us.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's a shift happening when we first opened the studios 20 years ago. All of our classes were power vinyasa. We tried to bring in meditation and yin, but it didn't go over well. But now it's becoming a lot more popular, which has been really cool to see. And I think it's because we've had a lot of people who've been coming to the studio for a while that they realize that, yeah, I could also use something like this as well, where I just sit, and so I think that that it's really nice to see, like nowadays it seems like a lot more people are are more open to meditation, just this the sitting part. So like, 20 years ago you had the physical yoga explosion, and now you're seeing the seated meditation, like those types of practices as well become mainstream.
Yay. Woot
Right.
woot. Uh, so you and your wife are yoga practitioners. You said you're practicing mindfulness too. Like, do you think that these practices have, and you had kids early, like maybe before all this started getting rolling, right? So do you feel like these practices have influenced your parenting at all and the way you kind of approach your kids?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think what it, we're kind of like a yoga family now. When we first started teaching, our kids wanted nothing to do with it, but now they're in ages 13 to 26, and all except our 13-year-old son are into it, and now it's cool, so they all want to be part of it. So how we do our best to raise them is just like when they're in difficult situations, which seems like out of we have 4 kids, it's always at least one like a day, is to just usually what they might be in like the room all day long where they're not getting out this energy. And so that's we recommend we always tell our kids, like, well, get outside and go for a walk, or you know go meet your friends and go to the park and do something. And so because we know, like, that's always what helped us, like, for me, it was sports was my outlet, and for my wife. And so we because the way my wife and I look at yoga is that it's not just like these yoga poses. There's different ways to practice yoga. Going for a walk is yoga. Like, go in the backyard and doing some gardening can be yoga. So, we try to get them to be as active as they can, because especially today with electronics, like, it's so easy for them to hide now in their rooms for hours. And then when they have something going on that's really affecting them emotionally, you know, th- they're usually they curl up in a ball, and they just they don't want to do anything. And so that's we try to keep them just you know go do something. Otherwise you just end up stuck in your mind.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. We are supported by Beam, and I am loving their best-selling sleep product, the Dream Powder Hot Cocoa. It now comes in delicious white chocolate peppermint. It's got swirls of peppermint mix with creamy white chocolate, and it's the perfect winter wind down for those cold, snowy nights. And it helps you sleep, so it's amazing. It's triple lab tested and contains the ultimate sleep promoting ingredients: nano CBD, reishi, magnesium, I-theanine, and melatonin. And no added sugar or artificial sweeteners. You can curl up with a guilt-free cup of white chocolate peppermint dream right before bedtime and get your best sleep ever. People really love it. In reviews, Jennifer M. wrote, "I've suffered from insomnia for years. I tried just about every supplement on the market, and this by far is the most effective. I'm very grateful for it. I fall asleep quickly and sleep deeper and longer. Thank you, Beam." Melanie wrote, "This stuff is legit. I'm a gym rat who just turned 50 and has sleep issues. I take this at 10 p.m. and sleep from 11 to 6 a.m. The best part is I wake up feeling refreshed and ready to hit the gym." Wow, awesome. So we need this kind of functionality in our life. Sleep is so, so, so important. And this is such a lovely, luxurious, and totally guilt-free, no added sugar or sweeteners way to get to sleep. White chocolate peppermint dream powder only lasts for a limited time, so get it while it's hot. Great news. For a limited time, if you subscribe to any Beam product, you can also take advantage of their best sale of the year for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. You'll get 40% off the first 3 months of any subscription, plus a free mug. And by the way, I really, really love their mug and frother, and 20% off any one-time purchase. Again, this is Beam's biggest offer of the year, and it won't last long. Head to beamorganics.com/hunter. That's BEAM organics.com/HUNTER for 40% off the first 3 months of any Beam subscription, plus a free mug. really good mug, and frother, or 20% off of any one-time purchase. Subscriptions are month to month and can be paused or canceled at any time. That's beamorganics.com/hunter. Yeah, almost like dissociating from your body too. If you're like
Mhm.
always online and all that stuff and you're never in your body, you're not, it's almost like it's like the opposite of yoga. It's like
Right.
mind and body are separate, right? Um, Now when I'm asking this because this was a big challenge for me. When you bef- first started, like, have you noticed any differences in your reactivity, right? Because that's something we talk about a lot here on the Mindful Mama podcast is like, our tempers arise, like we
Mhm.
get triggered by stuff. Um, and I'm just curious because you had your younger kids were like kind of in I think I remember from reading the book that they were in that kind of like pre yoga daddy stage.
Mhm.
And then and then as you got older, they were like they had yoga daddy. So did you notice any shifts and changes in that part of your parenting?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like before I was into yoga, I was it just as a kid I was diagnosed with ADD, so which is now ADHD, and so I was always go 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 go. I had no management of my mind skills to do that like whatsoever, and so yoga, because I'll always have it, of course, but yoga has really helps me with that. So, when I was, first became a dad, I had a really hard time with like all the different stuff happening. But once I started doing yoga, that helped me just manage my ADD, where I would notice, like when you mentioned earlier, like awareness, like that's like I think that's like the big word. When it comes to like having these shifts, is like that awareness, and that was like the first step for me, noticing when I would just not have any patience for some like goofy reason. And so then I would notice like, oh, why am I not being patient right now? Why am I like, just getting all flustered? And so over time, like noticing that when I would go back into ADD or I wasn't present with my kids, that was the other thing too. Like when I noticed when I have these special moments with my kids, like I was or when I was on a walk with them, and my mind would go to work or something like that, and they would be talking to me about their day, and I wouldn't be listening. But then over time, I'd realize like, hey, you're not listening. Because at first I was probably just on autopilot and not noticing that I wasn't noticing.
Mhm.
But over time, I started to strengthen that like through yoga and meditation. And so that's that is a skill that I'm still working on today, but that's something I try to keep honing and strengthening.
If there are, I well, let me ask this first. Just thinking about how you were parented by your own
Mm.
parents, or are there things that you tried to that you have thought about, like not wanting to pass on versus things that you've wanted to pass on? Like, have there been like, were there unskillful means or skillful means that you really wanted to
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. The most skillful thing that I learned from my parents was to just let kids at a certain age, of course, like to make their own decisions. It was interesting for me, like looking back at like my sports career when I got to a certain point, like maybe age 16 in high school, where I'd have some big decisions to make on sports, like should I focus more on this sport or this sport? But my dad was a super accomplished athlete. He was all state in baseball, football, basketball, and track, and he was drafted by the Pittsburgh Pirates. But he never he never pushed me in a sport, which, at times I would get frustrated with him, like, "Dad, like, why aren't you, like, helping me become, like, a better athlete?" And he's just like this, and he just wouldn't say anything. And now looking back, I realize he just wanted me to, like, plot my own course, and if I was really into a sport, I would put the time in or I wouldn't. And so that's something, that I try that we've done with our kids as well. Like, we haven't pushed them into anything in life, whether it's sports or anything, and just, let them make their own decisions. And of course, like, listen to them, when they want to talk about like big decisions, but do our best to not. Of course, if there's something where they could be harmed, like we'll say
Mhm.
something, but when they're just kind of thinking about certain things that we know that it's just best for them to come to their own decisions, we try to like just let them. I guess you could say practice some self reliance. So that was probably something that I learned from my parents that was very skillful. And then something that I guess you asked like something different was is my parents weren't really big on like taking chances. They were conservative, and so there was a lot of times where I would say, "Hey, you have to tell me what do you think you want me to do?" Like because as I mentioned, like they usually would just wouldn't say anything. I'm like, "Well, tell me," and it was usually when they would tell me, it was always the safe choice. Like so that's one thing that that um, now looking back, if I would have made safe choices, throughout like my athletic career, I wouldn't have gotten to where I was at. Like for example, when I was with the trying to go to the University of Pittsburgh Division I school, I was playing at a Division III, and I had to make the jump. And when I asked, my parents actually said what they really wanted me to do. They said, "Hey, you have something good right here. Don't take that chance." But that's how they grew up as well. That was
Mhm,
from their parents, which was
mhm.
coming from they had Great Depression. Parents was very conservative and not taking any chances. So I totally understood where they're coming from, and luckily I said like in the end they would always let me make my own decisions. So usually when I do my own thing anyways.
Yeah, I'm kind of hearing you say like to not let your fears or worries influence your child, right? And there's a
Mhm.
sense of like from what you're saying, like a sense of like letting go and also like a little detachment. I mean, I have to
Mhm.
honestly admit, like that's what I'm struggling with right now. My daughter's about to turn 14
Yep.
and I'm like, oh, like I just want to like come here. I want to hold you and hug you the way that I did. And she just did not want that. So it's like that letting go of that. And
Oh,
there's a little bit of mourning for that
I
time
can't
for
believe you're
me for
saying this.
sure.
My youngest is 13, turned 14. It's the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
don't you
Oh,
want
that's
to
a
hang out more and talk more? And then my wife keeps reminding me, like, what were you like when you were 13 going on 14? I'm like, oh yeah. So
so grumpy. Uh,
it seems to be universal. So I guess we're not alone.
oh, good. It's good to hear that. So, for any dads maybe out there who may be listening to this,
Mm,
um, maybe their partner's like, listen to this episode of the Mindful Mama
mm.
podcast. There's a football player on, did some yoga, who may be like, I'm just imagining like who maybe somewhat into these things, but there may be some people listening who are like, I don't know, my partner is doing all this mindfulness stuff and I don't get it, blah blah blah, and I'm just doing my thing. But what would you recommend for somebody who's a complete, in a place of like not in this world, who what would you recommend for that self-regulation piece, for that, that piece about being present? What would you recommend to that kind of person?
Yeah, well, I think that the easiest way, I believe, just from talking to other people, how they've gotten them into it, my own story, is to just find some piece of mindfulness into your like weekly routine. It doesn't have to be daily. I think a lot of times when we think like, oh, I need to get into yoga or meditation, so therefore I need to do 20 minutes a day, 7 days a week, and it just doesn't go that way. I think it's just to find some sort of mindfulness and whatever it is that's most the least intimidating way to do it. And so maybe it's doing yoga classes online, or maybe it's just going to a studio once a week. But I think it's just like committing to, I'm going to take the next few weeks to explore where I can bring mindfulness into my life, and just to go through and like, try different yoga studios, try different platforms online and just start to explore it, but just to like not have any expectations for it. Cause I think that's what can really make it the exploration stage just like cut off. I think when we look at it like, okay, I'm just going to go try this yoga class down the street, and they go to the class at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and for whatever reason they don't jive with the teacher or the studio. Oh, I tried yoga, now I'm done. And that can easily happen because there's a million different styles of yoga now, and there's a million yoga teachers out there that can easily happen. But I think it's just sticking with it. I mean, I know from my own personal experience, like I was in trial and error for years before I bought in, and it doesn't have to be that long because I was just so stubborn about it. But just it's just something, I think, just having an open mind and just being patient in that exploration stage. But because the payoff is can be really sweet, and yoga may not be for everyone for sure, but when when you do get it and you get that yoga bug, it's something that you can now do for the rest of your life. And that's something that I really appreciate about it now. When I first got into yoga, I was in my 20s, and so I had a very, very physical practice, which I really enjoyed for healing my body and building strength. But now, as I'm entering my 50s, I look at it completely differently. Now it's something that I know I can just help with my mental state, and I can just, when I just need to reset, I can just go do 15 minutes of yoga, or I can just meditate for 5 minutes. I can feel like a whole new person after that. And I know that I can keep adapting my yoga practice, and I can do it in my 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond. And there's not too many things that we can keep doing like that. And so it just really helps to have that option, as we move into aging, to take care of ourselves in a way that that is a practice in moderation.
Yeah, it's like sustainable. It's like a tool
Mhm.
that you have.
Absolutely.
It gives you
Mhm.
a tool set, you know, to self-regulate, to manage energy, to be present. So cool. Um, Sean, this has been such a pleasure to talk to you. I've really,
Yeah,
really
thank you. I really
enjoyed it.
enjoyed it.
Where
Mhm.
can people find out more about you and your book?
Oh, sure. Thanks for asking. Yeah, my website is seanconley.net, seanconley.net. And on there, yes, is my book, The Point After, as well as, and there's some resources for getting into yoga, some videos, some blogs about just like learning about like meditation as well. So yeah,
Cool.
thank you.
Yeah, cool. Check it out. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you
Thank
sharing your
you.
story. Like I said, I didn't think I'd be talking to a football player, but it was really interesting. I
Yeah,
was
good
like
timing with
complete.
the Super Bowl this
Yeah,
weekend.
yeah. Okay. Well, it won't go out, but so for the listener who's like, wait.
Okay.
Sam, Chelsea was just gonna edit out that Super Bowl comment.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It's not your
That
fault. It's totally fine. Totally fine.
was.
Okay. Anyway, thank you so much, Sean. It's been such a pleasure. And yeah, I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Hunter. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. I love his story, love his energy. What a great person. So I hope you enjoyed this episode too. Just a quick reminder, if you are interested in bringing the mindful parenting curriculum to your school, your therapy practice, your community, the mindful parenting teacher training program, the applications are due by the end of the year. That's December 31st. So if you are interested, go to mindfulparentingcourse.com/teach. That's mindfulparentingcourse.com/teach. And thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're subscribed and you share the podcast. If you find it interesting, you can share this one with all your football fans. And I hope you're hanging in there as we go into the holiday season and the new year. And I'm wishing you peace and joy and moments of spacious, calm contentment with your kids. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for listening. I can't wait to talk to you next week. Namaste.
I'd say definitely do it. It's really helpful. It will change your relationship with your kids for the better. It will help you communicate better. And just, I'd say communicate better as a person, as a wife, as a spouse. It's been really a positive influence in our lives. So definitely do it.
I'd say definitely do it. It's so worth it. The money really is inconsequential when you get so much benefit from being a better parent to your children and feeling like you're connecting more with them and not feeling like you're yelling all the time or you're like, why isn't things working? I would say definitely do it. It's so worth it. It'll change you.
No matter what age someone's child is, it's a great opportunity for personal growth and it's a great investment in someone's family. I'm very thankful I had this.
You can continue in your old habits that aren't working, or you can learn some new tools and gain some perspective to shift everything in your parenting.
Are you frustrated by parenting? Do you listen to the experts and try all the tips and strategies, but you're just not seeing the results that you want? Or are you lost as to where to start? Does it all seem so overwhelming with too much to learn? Are you yearning for a community of people who get it, who also don't want to threaten and punish to create cooperation? Hi, I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and if you answered yes to any of these questions, I want you to seriously consider the Mindful Parenting membership. You'll be joining hundreds of members who have discovered the path of mindful parenting and now have confidence and clarity in their parenting. This isn't just another parenting class. This is an opportunity to really discover your unique, lasting relationship, not only with your children, but with yourself. It will translate into lasting, connected relationships, not only with your children, but your partner too. Let me change your life. Go to mindfulparentingcourse.com to add your name to the waitlist, so you will be the first to be notified when I open the membership for enrollment. I look forward to seeing you on the inside. mindfulparentingcourse.com.